Hello, Clay. We're going to take a look at your 5 characteristics posting. Just kind of go through some of your images. I'll talk a little bit about what I'm observing. If there's a little bit of background noise, I just happen to be in my office, and so there may be a door opening or something. Just hopefully it's not too distracting. So let's go ahead and share screen here, and we'll get started. All right, so here we are. We've got the posting up, and as we can see, we've got your direction here. And as I look, first of all, one of the things that I look for is very simple. Are you posting the number of images that we're asking for? Are you labeling them in a way that we can easily access them? This is kind of important, even though it's really easy to do. It's important because the whole idea here is that we can see what you're putting up there and have evidence that you're gonna that you understand the project itself. So it looks pretty good so far, what I'm looking at. You've got the positions labeled. You've got each of the categories from intensity to temperature. It looks like you've got them correctly identified. Temperature is in color, contrast. Seems like it's there. Hardness. We've got a few underexposed images there on contrast. As you can see here, there are a couple here that are very, very dark. Those are underexposed, meaning not enough light. So in the future, you might want to exclude those from your postings. It's always a good idea to shoot many, many more images than you actually need in case you have some misfires where they don't quite turn out the way you want. That way you have plenty to choose from. You don't have to post images that are just way too dark like that. I like to start off just by doing an overview, much like you go into a gallery where you might take a long view, look at all the walls, and then kind of go in and look at some of the more specifics as you go. Looking at your direction, you're doing a very, very good job of coming in and using what I call the entire picture frame. What that means is when we look at an image like this, position 7, you are using from all the way to this edge of the of your frame. When you're framing up the image, you're using every bit of it. You've got a very what's called shallow depth of field. We'll talk about that in our aperture exercise for the aesthetics and control. But you've got a very shallow depth of field, which means that you have a thin plane that's in focus and the others are out of focus. It creates a sense of atmosphere. You've got just this little bit of text highlighted. While they are perceived as objects, they're not necessarily looking like bottles. So that's excellent. Clearly, this gives you a sense of direction when it comes to the lighting. You can see that there's a certain drama when you get into the side lighting. You get into position 6, where it's even more toward the back. Position 5, which is going to be directly behind the light. It looks like you kind of got them mixed up just a little bit. It looks like you've got position 4 identified as directly behind and position 5 as to the side. Position 5 technically on the compass would be the directly backlit, and position 4 would be to the side. So you would have, if we're looking at the back and my fingers are identifying the back, you would have position 6 over here, position 5 here, and position 4 here. You could have it the other way around, 6, 5, 4, but 5 would always be directly behind the object. You had 1 where the camera is, 2 to the side, 3 over here, 4, 5. So 5 would be directly behind. This image shows the light directly, basically directly behind the object. That's where that light is coming from. I can tell because I can see the highlights right there. Minor thing, just a labeling issue that you have there. You just identified it as 4. It's really 5. Otherwise, very nice job of using shadows. Position 1 is an excellent job of using the shadows to compose. Very, very good. Whoops, bounced right out of there. Didn't mean to jump right out. Looking at your intensity. Now, intensity is all about using the 2 lights. And we start off here with the single lighting. Kind of jump out of the view mode. Starting off here with the single light, and it looks pretty good. The single lighting, and then you've got this supplement right along the side here, which is filling in and brightening the shadows just a little bit. You're getting a little bit over here. You're clearly using a very low intensity fill light on that side. Here you can see a little bit more evidence of that fill light where you're bringing that fill light a little bit closer to the key light. What's important about the intensity, what's important about using 2 lights is to clearly identify which is the key, which is the fill. The key light is always going to be much brighter than the fill light. And it looks like you're understanding that. Really, in this first project, I'm looking for, 1, your understanding of the principle. Do you understand that temperature is all about exploring the color balance? Do you understand that intensity in this context is all about using the key light, identifying it, and then supplementing that with a fill? Direction, where's the light coming from? Do you understand those? That's the first thing. The second, I'm looking for evidence of exploration. In other words, are you exploring the possibilities with the composition? This isn't necessarily a composition class, but I would like to see your application of composition, which you learn in other classes. You learn them in 2-dimensional design. You might learn them in an earlier photo class, that type of thing. So we're looking for you to use the skills you've learned in some of your earlier composition classes and translating them to stuff like this. So temperature, this is where it kind of gets a little bit more aesthetic. You get to make some choices here where you're working through some of the colorations. I really like what you found here. This is really interesting. Maybe a little bit too far on the grape side, but I think you're finding some possibilities here. You can see just what you do when you mix match the color combinations. What sometimes happens though is when you start to focus on these elements where you're turning your attention a little bit more to the camera, which is what you did. You're operating the white balance now. You start to think more about camera operation. Sometimes you forget about composition. You forget about some of the other things. There's a lot to think about until there's not. In other words, once you get familiar and comfortable with all of these components that you're learning, once you get comfortable with that, it doesn't seem like so much to think about. But while you're learning it, it does seem like, oh, I got to remind myself of all of those things. So what happens is a lot of times when you start to focus on another component, you forget about some of the earlier ones. So for instance, your compositions are absolutely wonderful in this first one, which is the direction. It shows me that you understand what beautiful composition looks like. Once we get over here though, and you're thinking about color now, right? You're thinking about the color combinations and trying to get those right. Suddenly the compositions just sort of, take second seat. They kind of fall to the wayside, and these become pictures of bottles. And I would have loved to have seen your application of this kind of composition, a composition like this, where you're using the entire field, but then you're exploring the coloration, and you kept that kind of dynamic composition going within the coloration here. But your exploration of the colors is wonderful. Good job on that. Again, here we're working with multiple colors. Once we get more complex with the lighting, again, sometimes we start to forget about kind of coming in and keeping that intense composition, keeping the compositions dynamic. I mean, there's nothing wrong with pulling back. Everything doesn't have to be a close-up, but we do start to get a little bit more into pictures of bottles toward the end here. This is quite nice though, where you're highlighting just the edges of things. That's an interesting strategy. You're using the field a little bit more. Some reason my mouse is creating this wild jump here. You're creating some really nice shapes here with the compositions. So I think, yeah, I think you're in some really good directions here with lighting. And my sincerest hope is that you carry this over into the next projects, that we don't let go of what you're learning lighting wise as you progress into studying the camera and studying some of the other things that we work on moving forward. Let's look at the very last one, which I had identified at first. You had a few here that are just way too dark. You definitely want to take care of those and not have those in the future up there. But let's take a look at some of the ones that are there. Now, this is all about, hardness is all about the shadows. Okay, so hardness is really about softening the light, creating diffusion on the light. And so it's this area here that we're looking at, right? So to differentiate these shadows, how are they being changed and modified? So I'm looking at them and I'm trying to identify, is there evidence of that? And am I seeing the shadows change in these images? And I'm not really seeing them change. Now, maybe they are being changed in the ones that got super dark, and maybe that there's not evidence of that. But I think we need to take a look at that in terms of maybe redoing this one or going through your images on that so that this last scenario of hardness translates a little bit better so that we can see that you're sort of picking up on the nature of controlling hardness, which is really all about the shadows, whether the shadows have a crisp line or whether they start to fade. And I'm not really seeing that happen in this one. So I would recommend to go ahead and go through your images. Maybe you can find better examples of the images that you shot, or sometime during the semester, revisiting that one little exercise and then recompiling and resubmitting. I'll go over with you how that works. What I do is I take both grades and I combine them together. It always improves your grade. So we can talk about that in the end. I will be submitting a grade for you. You'll have a little card that shows what your grade is. You'll be happy. I mean, you did pretty well on this project. So other than just a few things that you'll see and that I've talked about, other than that, you did a very good job on this first project, and I hope you continue the excellent work. All right, well, that should be about it, and we'll see you in the studio. Bye-bye now.